Okay, I'm experiencing a lot of issues here. Um, this has not been going very well. I have no idea why I'm randomly having issues now. Um, Hopefully this episode comes out just fine. And that's kind of annoying. Okay, so I'm just gonna rehash what I said just a tiny bit. So basically, right here we have the Marvel list, and in here we got N's versus S's, sort of dominating the divide between the characters. You have N's taking sort of more leadership roles, S's taking more sidekick roles. You'll also see that there's some exceptions to that. Those exceptions are interesting, and maybe we'll talk about them on a different show. But yeah, so here, I'm going to break down, and this might be helpful because it's a common reference point for a lot of people. I'm going to break down one person's arc, and that would be Tony Stark. Mostly because I understand ENTPs very well, because I am one. So we'll take Tony Stark. I don't know Marvel stuff so well that I'm going to make no errors in describing this at all. But I'm going to try. So here's Iron Man's arc. So we start off with Iron Man being the son of a wealthy man, which is an interesting setup. It gets the NTP into a position where they've already got all the resources they could possibly want, so they don't have a resource acquisition problem to deal with, and they can just start generating, right? So what does he do with the company? He has a whole bunch of ideas. He develops a whole bunch of hardware, software, tech, and stuff, and all he cares is that his ideas are validated and that he makes money off of them, right? So he's very NETI focused, right? Like that's where his entire mind is. He's not very well rounded. He's got sort of like a tunnel vision on NETI, meaning that he's very ideas oriented, barring everything else. We learned that his his helper in life at this time is Pepper Potts, who, interestingly enough, depending on who you look at and what movie you're looking at, is either an ISTJ, an INTJ, or an INFJ. And it's interesting when you look online, you find all three of those variations, and we'll definitely be coming back to that and asking ourselves, why did that happen for Pepper Potts? And that'll be a story for a moment from now. So what does Pepper Potts do? Well, she's sort of a stand-in representation of someone who creates order for the ENTP to exist in, right? This very childlike, undeveloped ENTP who is very NETI dominated without any consideration for other functions, people with other functions, right? And uses that FE primarily for persuasion, right? So he's very good at selling pitches, right? He gives that speech. Very, very good representation of an ENTP, right? What an ENTP is good at, right? And what an ENTP can lean into. The blind spot is what his ideas are being used for, right? So, like, he's got all these inventions, this a great understanding of science and all that kind of stuff. But because he's successful in his ideas, he doesn't really care about, the impact on other people's lives. Let's see here. So he's very leadership oriented. So he owns his company. He didn't leave his company, for someone else to buy. He didn't just go spend it all and run it to the ground, right? Like, he took the leadership of the company and he enjoys being in control of all the resources, right? He's very good at gathering people. And this is something that becomes more and more expressed over his arc, right? So he's very good at collecting an unlikely crew. So this is an ENTP trope, right? So, like, if you think of someone who's sometimes described an ESTP, which would be Tyler Durden from Fight Club. But he could be an ENTP, STP, depending on how you look at it. I think he's an ENTP personally, even though I think that might be the minority position. What does he do? He bans an unlikely crew of degenerates, right? Like that's essentially what he does. Is he pulls together people from all walks of life, into one united cause. So Tony Stark does the same thing. He's able to pull people from all walks of life into a united cause. Why is he able to do that? It's because of his FE. His FE allows him to understand what other people want, what other people would like to hear. He's very good at persuasion, and he's also good at understanding social order, right? So he's good at understanding who feels subordinate to who. He's very good at understanding what someone's overall life goals are and how they fit into the ENTP's vision for this group, this band of characters that end up being created. Okay, so there's that gathering aspect. There's a low regard for other people's arguments, especially when those arguments aren't formulated in a sort of TI fashion, right? So like if someone comes to him and says, well, we don't have enough money for X and the time doesn't work, and then you're like, but Tony's like, this is the best option. Are you stupid? This is the best option, right? Like, you gotta understand, rationally speaking, if we put 2 plus 2, it equals 4, it doesn't equal 4 today and not tomorrow, it always equals 4, right? So that would be sort of the low regard for non-TI sort of argumentation, and I would say that can lead to intellectual arrogance, right? So, like, Tony is, especially at the beginning of his arc, is very intellectually arrogant. Okay. Another ENTP thing that Tony Stark is he's very open, right? He's not closed off onto certain ideas that might seem to others to be ridiculous, right? So, if someone tells him, we really have to do X, and X would sound super ridiculous to most people, he's very open, which is that P really coming out and doing its job, and it's saying, well, no, hold on, I haven't fit this through my NETI yet, I haven't run it through the pipeline yet, so hold on, like, I'm gonna run it through my pipeline, then we'll find out if it's ridiculous. Once I find out it's ridiculous, I'm gonna meme on you, right? Like that's the sort of ENTP pipeline. And the last thing I would say is that we see his arc shift, and very purposefully in the story, around the Civil War time, of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. What is Civil War but an upending of two very strong characters' worlds? One character, the ENTP, being Tony Stark and Iron Man, and the other character being an ISFJ, which is Captain America. If you notice, ENTP, ISFJ, they're literal opposites, right? So an ISFJ is going to be very physically oriented. What can they achieve with if you think about Captain America as a character, right? Like, his achievements are his physicality. It's his physical excellence, right? So, like, he executes things via practice, and he's very, like, oriented on traditional virtue, right? So, like, it's these ideas that, like, are passed down, the culture that he's in, right? Captain America, right? Whereas Iron Man, he's not tied to the country in the same way, and his power comes from his suit. You get the archetypal differences that are happening here. The suit is the physical embodiment of the abstract ideas of Iron Man, and I guess the physical prowess and the name of Captain America really speak to his I suppose his sort of SFJ tendencies. So completely opposites on the Myers-Briggs spectrum, and we put them head to head, and then we flip them onto the wrong sides of the script. So Iron Man being someone, the ENTP being classically anti-establishment, classically sort of like a trendsetter, or maybe that's not the right word, but a path maker is maybe a better word. Thinking about ways to do things completely and utterly different than people have done them before. And then we have Captain America being the exact opposite, saying, or naturally being like, well, we should do it the way that it's always been done because that works, right? But we put them on the opposite sides of the spectrum. And how do we do that in Civil War? We make Iron Man the one who is for the organizing body, right, of the Avengers, who's for everyone signing on to being, beholden to society, whereas Captain America is saying, hold on, no, we don't like that because we have all these reasons to think otherwise. So we put them on the wrong sides of the argument. Why? Because we're exposing their fourth function. We're exposing their fourth function. So for Iron Man, the fourth function would be SI, which would be memory. And what gets an Iron Man to decide that the Avengers is the best thing? It's him being exhausted by not being able to solve the problem with just NE, TI, and FE. It's just not enough to solve the problem. So what does he do? He resorts to his inferior function, or his danger, as the chart called it. And so what does he do? He looks at what has gotten them into this organization, or this position, right? It's not being on the same page, not being beholden. He's thinking about his own limits, and he's projecting them onto the entire group, right? So he's saying, look, I went too far so many times, and I contributed to not solving the problem. And I'm traumatized by that, and I can't stop thinking about it. So what I'm going to do? I'm going to force everyone to acknowledge and accept that we need this time to not go the ENTP route. We need this time to go the SI route, right? The way that remembers the immediate thing that just happened. Now, since this is the inferior function, this is not going to be used very well. Like someone who is SI dominant, right, is going to use memory very well compared to someone who is SI inferior. The SI inferior person doesn't have nuance with that. It's more of like a covering up of issues, right? And so the issue is not being adequate to solve the problem, and that's hurting the ENTP's pride, and it's causing all this ugliness to bubble about within them, and their way to handle it is by constraining it with SI. That makes sense. That's the good writing of Marvel at its best. I know I meme on Marvel a lot, and I really don't like most of their stuff. And that's a confluence of things. It's not just archetypal characters. It's probably the best thing they do, frankly. It's having characters in these nice archetypal arcs. Okay, let's go back to Pepper Potts real quick. Pepper Potts has many different sort of, I guess, types. She's either, like I said, an ISTJ, an INTJ, or an INFJ. Why is that? And why do we seem to not care so much about Pepper Potts? It's because they screwed up her character. That's why she's like that. And the reason they screwed up her character is because they couldn't decide which one she was. They could have picked any one of those, and it would have been completely fine and coherent. Any one of those things would have made complete sense playing off of Tony Stark, but they had no idea which one she was. If I remember correctly from the first movie, I think she functions in the first movie as an INTJ, right? So she argues a lot with him. She's very caught up in his big ideas, in the sense that she co-identifies with those big ideas, right? Like, so it's not as if she's just working for those big ideas. Like, if she was an ISTJ, she might well do, right? She co-ops those big ideas and wants to help him organize his world in order to achieve them. Why? Because her stack is NITE, right? So she already knows what the best practical thing to do is, or at least thinks she knows what the best practical thing to do is at all times. That's what NIT is doing, right? It's producing the practical solution like that, the optimized solution in a heartbeat, saying this is what you have to do. Maybe a little stubborn about it, but that's what NIT does. And that plays off of Iron Man's ENTP very much, and her being in T as well makes it so that their stubborn fighting is entertaining, right? They play off of each other in a way that's like, always butting heads. Then, as she kind of takes a more romantic role, she suddenly kind of becomes an INFJ, peering into his soul and extracting, the man within, right? That's a completely different person. You can't just go from INTJ to INFJ. Let's pull up the stack real quick, and I'll show you why. Here, let's pull this up again, because I think it'll make it more obvious when we look at the chart. Why this makes her character, the T versus F thing is not just T versus F, it's that the stack has completely rearranged itself. So if we look at an INTJ, it goes NITE, FISE as the top four, and the INFJ goes NIFE, TISE, SE, right? Completely different. Which means that the way that she processes things, interacts with Tony, decides what she's going to do with life, is completely different in terms of the pipeline, the cognitive pipeline, right? So when we see her shift to an INFJ, which makes more sense if you want to have that more romantic relationship between the two, because they're going to be more precise opposites, or complements is the better word. They're going to be more precisely aligned in complement. That makes sense for a romantic pursuit, because what does the ENTP need? And I'm phrasing this in terms of what the ENTP needs is because he's the main character, right? So if the INFJ was the main character, we would think about it differently. But because Iron Man is the main character, right, so we're asking ourselves, what can we do to increase the well-roundedness of Iron Man, right? What would be the perfect ally to that kind of person? It would be someone who has a good understanding of emotion, right? Especially the emotion of others that isn't just the input-output sort of like low-grade ENTP way of looking at the world, but one who can understand subtlety, can understand achieving things through that subtlety, can find the subtlety within himself, someone who responds well to the ENTP's way of care, right? If you look at the function stacks, you'll see a complementary nature that they can understand each other because they're both N's, they've both got dominant N functions, they're both big abstract people, but when it comes to how we apply that abstract in the real world, the concrete world, they make each other better, right? So that's the INFJ. So that's why, I mean, not that the INTJ doesn't make the ENTP better, not that anyone can not make anyone else better, frankly, right? But it's that the idea is really here that the INFJ is the more sweet, like, romantic match, whereas the INTJ ANTP is the more sort of butting of heads, right? And so she kind of changes a little bit. And then the last thing we have on the list here is ISTJ, which also makes sense why she would want to be we want her to be an ISTJ sometimes. When you want her to play secretary. And again, I'm not throwing shade at S's. I think partly the reason why we don't get great S characters is because N's write them, right? But the idea here is that she becomes an ISTJ when she just needs to get the books done, right? And we portray her as really liking her organization on a very physical, concrete level instead of on an abstract level. So there you go. That's Pepper Potts, and that's the kind of issue you can avoid by properly categorizing your characters. Okay. Now, I want to give you an example of a villain ENTP, now that we're talking about ENTPs. A villain ENTP, classic one, is Christopher Nolan's Joker. And, I mean, you just have to think about it a little bit, if you know anything about ENTPs, and be like, yeah, that makes complete sense. Now, one of the reasons why this is very interesting is because we can use the types of the characters to create not just interplays, contrasts, foils, whatever, between two characters, but we can use it to create contrasting themes as well. So if you look at Christopher Nolan's Batman, we see that Joker is an ENTP, and again, we're going to see this dichotomy again. That Batman, I would say, is probably, you know what? You have to think about this more. I'm not actually entirely sure. I think he's an INTJ, but maybe I have to think about that more. Let me know in the comments what you think. But the idea here is that you have someone, the ENTP, who's talking completely the philosophical has become the entire world. Forget the physical, right? It's all nihilism for Joker. It's the absolute punishment and misery of others based off of the disregard for any other function other than chaos. And NETI is definitely something, and it's definitely chaos, right? The theme of chaos is coming up throughout the entire Dark Knight movie. Whereas for Batman, it's about justice. It's about this abstract concept that it just must. We just need to beat the problem, right? We need to talk about these politicians, right, and what they need to be doing, and what the police needs to be. Oh, there's corruption here. We need to solve that. It's practical. That's why I kind of lean into that TE dominating INTJ, right? We just need to do this. We just solve the problem this way. The ENTP is saying, "Shut up." Shut up. You don't even understand the abstraction levels that I've reached, man. I've reached heights of abstraction that you don't even understand. Why is the world anyway? Why should anything be practical? I'm completely unpredictable. You can't touch me. That's how unpredictable I am. Anyway, that's an interesting other way to look at it. And if you look at the newest iteration of Joker, he's not an ENTP at all. Right? And let me know in the comments if you have a guess as to what kind of a character he might be. Okay. And I think it's very obvious he's at least an I. Okay. Now, I want to explore one last example, and this comes from a show that I've been watching with my wife. And it makes up the episode artwork down there. Right? So that show is... Spy versus Family, and we have three characters down there in the episode artwork. We've got the male, the female, and the child. Right. I'm going to butcher their names if I try to remember their names. But the interesting thing about this show is we can apply the same sort of writing techniques to the characters here. So, if you don't know anything about the show, the idea here is that we've got this sort of fake family, so the mom and dad aren't actually married, or I mean they're married on paper, but they're not in love, right? And the child is an orphan. Yeah, and so if we were to type them, the quote unquote dad would definitely be an INTJ. The quote unquote mom would definitely be an INFJ. And the child is a child, so it's very hard to type the child. Children are very difficult to type, especially at that young age. And you can see with INTJ versus INFJ that the compatibility here. Let me pull up. I have a chart here actually. This chart's actually not bad. It's not the best. It's not bad. This chart here shows sort of the quote unquote compatibility between the types. And you could use this as a sort of a way to understand how people will jive and interplay with each other. Now, disclaimer, anyone could jive with anyone else, right? And in fact, the controlling factor is going to be maturity and virtue as to whether or not you can jive with someone who's in the red with you or something like that. This chart is not an end-all, be-all. But if you're talking about archetypes, right, INFJ, INTJ, actually, let me see if I can pull up INFJ, INTJ, right? So it's green. Right, they can be friends, but it's not blue, right? So it's not like they're like a see on site perfect match, just from their function stacks alone. We're talking about their complementariness, right? It's not the quintessential perfect storm of functions. Instead, they're just good, right? What does this do in this show? We have this tension in the show where we have the main female character, the quote-unquote mom, who is crushing on the quote-unquote dad, right? So she's pining after him, or at least, maybe not pining after him is not the right word, but she likes him and wants him to like her, right? And we have this other character who's not pictured below, who is also pining after him. Well, she's properly pining after him, like she's obsessed with him. And she's an INTJ as well as he is. Now did these writers write this intentionally? Probably not in this way, but you can see how good character writing can sort of lead you in this direction naturally. Because what this does, because the main two characters are not the perfect quintessential matchup of characters, it makes their romance difficult or less automatic, less magical, if that makes sense. Which means that the tension between her liking him doesn't feel weird that he doesn't feel the same way. And also doesn't feel weird that their complementariness is not always on display, that he's not always fixing the problems that she has, she's not always fixing the problems that he has. They're not really doing that if you watch the show, right? But hey, love is love, right? Or, well, that's a common phrase, maybe. That's not what I meant by that, using the common phrase, but what I mean by that is, like, you know, anyone can be in love with someone else. Love is willing the good of the other, right? That's what love is. And so that's a choice. And so they're definitely good on that. Let me pull up the chart again. They're definitely good on this chart, right? But they're not perfect in the way that it's weird that they don't just automatically fall in love. So that creates a long-lasting tension that can still be satisfyingly resolved, which is a good thing. However, we've got the antagonist, or the semi-antagonist, who's really in love with him, who's also an INTJ. She fell in love with herself. Right? In fact, she didn't just fall in love with herself, she fell in love with someone who basically formed her after his own image. Getting even deeper. You see where this can go? I think it's a cool thing that you can go this way with characters just using Myers-Briggs. Right? So, she's basically formed her personality after him and falls in love with him because of that, which is more of an infatuation. Right? And that's how it comes off in the show. Very, very good. That's how you want to do it. Okay. The last thing I want to say is that virtuous people tend to be very difficult to type. When I say virtuous people, I mean people who are better than most people, right? They choose the good the most. They're depicted as the wisest, the holiest, right? They're hard to type because all of their functions are more used. And when I say more, I mean all of them, right? So if we go back to the function stack here, if I can pull it up properly, you'll notice, we have those last four. People who are well-rounded even have better shadow functions. They may not use them very often, but they're still better at them than the average person. So think about your archetypal wise people. Think about Dumbledore, right? Let's just run away with Dumbledore for a second, right? So Dumbledore can understand every, student practically. It's because he's mastered so many of his functions. He understands better how his students are thinking and functioning, right? He's still going to have a personality. We all have personalities, no matter how virtuous we are. He's going to lean in on a certain set of those four functions as his go-to filter for the world, and those can change for sure. over time, but he's become less specific of a personality from the MBTI perspective simply because he's more well-rounded. So his stack is less extreme, is a good way to think about it. If you think about virtue as a mean between two goods, this should make a lot of sense, right? So let's say that we have an ENTP, again, because I understand myself the best. An ENTP virtuous person, what does that look like? Well, it might look like Tony Stark at the end of his arc, right? Doesn't he feel a lot different and less placeable on the list? Why is that? That's because his SI works a hell of a lot better now. His memory doesn't drive emotional decisions. In fact, he's not even, he knows who he is and his place in the order of things, and he's satisfied with it. Right? But it's not as if his character has become incoherent. It's not like he uses a stack that doesn't make sense or doesn't exist. Right? It's just that his stack is a lot less extreme. I hope that makes sense. But in any case, that is my episode on Myers-Briggs in a nutshell. I will probably be talking about in the future. I hope some of that at least got caught on camera, because I think that was a pretty interesting section. If you think so as well, I'd love if you hit the thumbs up button. If you enjoy content like this, definitely subscribe. Check out my personal channel if you want to. It's Ariella on YouTube. If you search up Auriela, I'm going to be posting a lot more on there, it looks like, and I'm going to appreciate the support from people on there. So definitely go check that out. And if you have any comments about how Myers-Briggs can affect your writing, or how it has affected your writing, even your viewing, how you view things and dissect characters, please let me know down below. I would love to hear it, because this is a topic I don't think I've ever seen anyone talk about. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but hopefully this helps you. So with that, some final housekeeping for the show. I'd like to say thank you to 909 Crime and Rob Sharmer for supporting us on Locals for $5 a month. That is super, super appreciated. And if you want to join them, you can go to mixedmedia.locals.com. All links you could possibly want, including to our Spotify, our Discord, etc., are at mixedmediapodcast.com. You just go to mixedmediapodcast.com, click any link that you want there. You will end up where you want to be. And I think that's all I have for today. So we'll see you next Monday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern. Bye.
Look, tell a man no trouble. I don't want beef, man. I just want vibes. Big man like me, no need for the telephone hype. I got too much getting online. One rule, then dead I'm on site. Wrong move, I bet they gon' ride. No need for the telephone hype, nah. No need for the snoozing. Big whip outside, I'm cruising. Big stick inside, no losing. Better watch out for the snake and Judas is. Don't ask them who this is. I bet they know what I'm moving in. I bet I show it into a dim.